We're picking up where we left off from our round one NBA mock draft that came out earlier this past week. And now round two here of the NBA mock draft. This is the first time that we have covered the second round here in an NBA mock draft. So if you guys do appreciate the work I'm putting in and also do enjoy the content, make sure to leave a like. Also subscribe to the channel if you are new. It is really, really appreciated if you do so. It does help the channel grow and also lets me know, that you guys do appreciate the content and are enjoying what we're putting out. So now let's go on here. Pick 31, the Indiana Pacers are on the board. This pick comes from the Cleveland Cavaliers trade of Karis LeVert. In round one, they had pick 17 from that trade as well. So they have 17 and 31 at this point in the mock draft season. And here at this spot, I think it's all about going best player available. And one that makes a lot of sense here, Malaki Branham, someone who's really come on as of late. Got snubbed from my first round mock draft, but I know a lot of people are higher on him than I am. The one concern I have about him is how can he play with quickness? Is he going to be quick enough for the NBA? But the system that makes a lot of sense for him is the Indiana Pacers with Rick Carlisle. He likes to have versatile defensive players with solid shooting touch, and Malaki Branham fits all those boxes. He's someone with a pretty solid frame coming out of Ohio State, understands defensive concepts well, and I think moving forward will have a nice role in the NBA, even if he goes as low as 31, which is probably close to the floor of where he'd go in the NBA draft. Pick 32, we got the Orlando Magic here now at this spot, obviously in round one, made a huge addition, and now at this spot, obviously, as you guys can see too, Shaedon Sharpe is still on the board. I did not include him in the first round mock. I do want to touch on that really quickly because the reasoning why here is because there's rumors he's going to stay at Kentucky. So I'm doing some of my mocks with him in it, some of them without him in it. So I know his picture is going to be there and you're going to say, wow, well, they should have taken him 31st overall. He's not actually available. Okay, I'm just not including him in this mock draft, even though his picture is on the screen here because I am using a third-party site for this mock. So 32nd here, the Orlando Magic now on the board. And I think if you're looking for a player here that makes a lot of sense for Orlando, you have to take someone who has projectable upside specifically at the wing/guard spot. For me, that's Bryce McGowan's out of Nebraska. I do like what he could projectably be. He's a 6'7" guard with pretty good vertical bounce. Anyone who's watched Cornhuskers basketball this year knows how tough his load is from night to night. Now, the Cornhuskers were absolutely terrible. One of the worst teams in college basketball this past season. But I don't attribute that to Bryce McGowan's. In fact, I think he was one of the only few bright spots for that team. The rest of the team just wasn't talented enough around him, and he really had to shoulder the load. Led to a lot of tough shots, led to a lot of misses. But I think get him in the NBA, put him on a team where you have other nice talent around him. A couple of years from now, he could be a nice player. I'm sure he's going to need some time in the G League if he does decide to come out from Nebraska this year, which is what I'm assuming. I'm assuming he'll enter the draft, and then I think he's going to need some time in the G League. So probably won't be making huge strides in the NBA right away, but down the road, I do think this could be a valuable pickup for a roster. 33, we've got the Toronto Raptors here now, and this is partially why we're doing a second round mock. Raptors fans, I'm thinking specifically about you guys here because I've had some comments saying, hey, Raptors fan here, when are the second round mocks coming out? Because I want to watch for my Raptors. Here they are. This is it right now here for you. And 33rd here, we've got the Toronto Raptors. So with Toronto, I do want to talk about specifically what they have. They are kind of lacking a center at this point still. I thought Drew Eubanks was going to be the guy when they traded for him in the Thaddeus Young deal. They ended up not keeping him. He's actually played fairly well in Portland on a bunch of 10-day contracts. So I was kind of surprised that they decided to not keep him around. If I were in their shoes, I would have. But I'm going to specifically look at the center spot here. Ismail Kamagate makes some sense, but there's one specifically I want to go with, and that's Ariel Hukporti from Melbourne. He's playing in the NBL right now, and he's actually had a pretty nice season over there for what his current age is. He's actually carved out some consistent minutes and also has been able to shoot the three ball fairly well. Has a pretty nice looking stroke. So if you're looking to build around Scotty Barnes, who maybe isn't the best jump shooter himself yet, you probably want a big who can space it out a little bit, but can also protect the rim. I think he's the perfect guy to put into Nick Nurse's defense because he's lengthy and he's going to protect the rim at a really good level, at a really good rate. So here for me, Toronto, Ariel Hukporti's the selection, 33rd overall. Oklahoma City now on the board. You're 34th overall. And again, this is a team that you're probably going to look for a little bit more size and forward versatility here. And there's a few different options. We could look at the small forward spot. Justin Lewis here makes some sense for Marquette. This kid jumps out of the gym. He's a freak athlete who I think could make a little bit of noise here. And then you could also look at the power forward position, you know, a guy like David Roddy, who's pretty much the definition of a hard worker, someone who's going to get in the gym, make stuff happen, and then also give maximum effort when he's on the floor. I do think that makes some sense. I am going to, however, offer Michael Foster Jr., though, who hasn't had the best season for the G League Ignite. But the reason I opt with him here is he's played out of position a little bit for the G League Ignite. I think he's a talented player who, if he plays at the 4 a little bit more consistently in the NBA, probably could give you some serious minutes and actually have a nice long career if you give him a little bit of time to develop. And they're in Oklahoma City, they have nothing but time. So for me there, I think that makes a lot of sense. You get a player in there who doesn't need to become a key factor right away on day one. The expectation is not to go win a championship right now. Give him some time to develop, give him some minutes in the NBA, and see what you can get with him in round 2 here. I mean, these are round 2 selections, so a lot of these guys probably aren't going to be, ground shakers, if we're going to be honest about it. But there's some of them out here that could make a little bit of noise, so that's what we're going through here talking about. And again, here we got Orlando at this spot, and I think for me, with what's on the roster here, the center spot doesn't really need to be addressed. I think here you're trying to find ways to probably try and take a big time stab at someone who you think maybe could become a star down the road. And that's maybe Jean Montero here out of Overtime Elite. He's one of the more intriguing players in this year's class, specifically because he's playing in a startup league for Overtime Elite. Anyone who knows the brand Overtime, they're also starting up their own football league this summer with Cam Newton being one of the headliner players. But for me, the Overtime Elite, they've had some competitive games, but some of the games are non-competitive in terms of, help side rotations are a little lackluster. Boxing out's a little questionable. The overall environment is good, not great. Probably not what you would expect from, a collegiate program or an overseas, Euro League type game or league game in the NBL. It's not to that level, but Jean Montero has shown a lot of playmaking touch. And I think for Orlando, even though they already have a crowded backcourt, adding in another talented playmaker, you could see some value there with it. So I think Orlando probably in a position to move some of these assets, maybe try and consolidate, bring in a veteran or something. But for me, if I'm Orlando, if I'm keeping these picks, I'm going to try and find players who have good upside. 36 Sacramento here. And they're in a position where I think that they have to try and figure something out for shooting. With their shooting situation right now, which is partially why with who I went with in round 1, if you guys haven't checked out that video, go make sure to do so. I went with someone who could shoot the basketball. And again, Sacramento here wants to start winning. And there's a player here who in the Big East actually had a pretty good season. And that's Julian Champagnie from St. John's. His brother Justin was a draft pick last year. And I think Julian Champagnie could be a nice pickup here as well. Tried to come out last year, ended up going back to school simply because his draft stock wasn't strong enough. But 36th overall here, I think there is some legitimacy to him going off the board at this point. 37, now we got the Portland Trail Blazers, a team that's, again, looking for some size and versatility and probably a little bit more athleticism. I'm going with Justin Lewis out of Marquette. I think this one just makes too much sense. Gives you another wing who can literally soar through the air. This guy's a blur in transition. Really fun player to watch. If you guys haven't watched his highlights, make sure to go do so because he's one of the more entertaining players to watch in college basketball. Now, I don't know if he necessarily solves a lot of their problems. He's a little bit of a development piece here. But I do think if you're looking from Portland's perspective, probably not going to build it back overnight. Rome wasn't built in a day, and I don't think the Portland Trailblazers will be either. I do think that they're going to have to tweak this roster quite a bit, and they can afford to be a little patient here. At the end of the day, worst case, you trade Damian Lillard a year from now, probably get a good collection of assets. You don't want to just sell this year's draft in order to try and make Dame happy. I know he's the best player they've had for quite some time. I don't really care. Either you're going to win or you're not, and you're not going to win by making a whole bunch of rash moves on draft night here. So you should go through the process and make smart decisions based on what you have on your roster. Pick 38, the Cleveland Cavaliers here now on the board. They've had a fantastic season and deserve a lot of credit for everything that's gone right for them. Here at this spot, I'm going to go with guard Blake Wesley. I think he's just too good of a player to pass up on here. They made the move for Karis LeVert, and I understand as to why. They felt like this was their season when they did it. They were top 4 in the Eastern Conference. Since then, they've kind of, dwindled a little bit. Colin Sexton's headed toward restricted free agency. My guess is they're going to try and keep him. Otherwise, they could have used his restricted rights as a trade chip. This past trade deadline, they decided not to do that. But regardless, even with Garland and, with Karis LeVert there now, and with Colin Sexton, I still think Blake Wesley is worthy of a pick. He should be a top 40 selection. Even getting him at 38, I do think is a steal based on where I have him on my big board. He slid a little bit in this mock simply because some teams in the 20s aren't going to be looking for a ball dominant guard like what he projects to be. And I don't think Cleveland specifically is either, but it does give them some insurance in case a team comes in and tries to max out Colin Sexton. You know, you could look at a team like Orlando or maybe San Antonio or the Oklahoma City Thunder. All of those teams have cap space and significant cap space at that. Maybe they want to try and make a run at a guy. And Colin Sexton is one of those names out there who does make teams better. I think could have some value. Maybe they want to go out and try and, see if Cleveland's willing to give him what they're willing to give him. Even if it's not a max, it could be, upwards of 20 million. And maybe the Cavs say, yeah, no, we're good. And then you look at a Blake Wesley scenario there. 39, San Antonio Spurs now on the board. And this is their fourth pick of the draft. They have a ton of assets. And here for me, I think we're just going to try and get a player who can come in specifically at the center spot and give some quality, consistent backup minutes behind Jakob Poeltl. And for me, that's Ismail Kamagate, the French player. He's very, very consistent defensively. And I think when you look at what he can be as a prospect, he's going to be able to come in and give you really consistent minutes behind Poeltl, like I was talking about, which I think is huge here for San Antonio. This draft has been massive for them. They'd have 3 first-round picks, and now with pick 39, they were able to address another concern I have for this roster. It's going to be interesting to see how they draft. Of course, last year they went with Josh Primo, the youngest player in the draft, with a lot of upside. Maybe they feel, hey, we're a little bit more ready to compete now after seeing DeJounte Murray's an all-star. We're right in the play-in race here as the 10 seed right now is the time I'm recording this. So very possible here that San Antonio says, we want to try and just get better right now and see if we can make a push for the actual playoffs, maybe get to an 8 or 7 seed. Pick 40, we've got the Charlotte Hornets here now. I addressed a massive need for them earlier in this draft, and now I think the big thing here for me is looking in the shooting guard department or a small forward, specifically because I do have some concerns about Gordon Hayward's longevity and future there in Charlotte. He was a phenomenal signing for them, don't get me wrong, and I think they did really well by bringing him in. But the issue here now is, he's had some issues with his health, so I'm not sure exactly what he's got left in the tank in terms of consistency. And then also the shooting guard spot. I love their James Bouknight signing last year. We haven't seen a ton of him yet this season, but I do think they could still look to bring in another wing guard here. And a guy that makes some sense for me, I do like Luke Travers from Perth. He's a player for the Perth Wildcats in the NBL. I really like some of the NBL guys this year. There's a lot of talent coming over to the NBA from that league. But I'm actually going to go with Christian Brown here from Kansas. I think he's one of the more consistent college players coming into this year's draft. Probably is not going to be a total game changer, but again, does give you some depth and a guy you could probably trust pretty early. I think they're in the same department as San Antonio, where they're trying to get into the playoffs sooner rather than later. 41, Minnesota Timberwolves here now. This pick comes from Washington in a series of moves here. Now I think that this pick has finally ended up in Minnesota. And with this pick, there's a few things that they could consider and look for at this spot. I already found a forward for them. I still think that they need to look for a backup point guard. And I'm going to actually opt for JD Davison here out of Alabama. I think he actually gives them an intriguing backup behind D'Angelo Russell. He's a player who I thought could have been a lottery pick coming into this year's draft, just based off his high school mixtapes alone. You thought, wow, maybe this kid could become something special. And he had a really inconsistent year for Alabama. So unfortunately, a player that I wanted to see succeed just didn't quite have the freshman season I think he was hoping for, and a lot of other people that were wanting to see him play meaningful minutes early in his career were hoping for. But what I do think here is he comes into Minnesota. They got J-Mac right now, Jordan McLaughlin, as their backup point guard. And I think he could compete with J-Mac pretty early on for some of those backup point guard minutes, specifically because he offers a little bit of a difference in style from what Minnesota already has with D'Angelo Russell, where, D'Lo's kind of slow pace, going to play his own game, get to his spots, and then finish and score the basketball. JD Davison here instead is a blur. He's very, very quick with the basketball when he's decisive and decides he can go downhill, which is something I'd like to see him do more frequently. And he is one of the most vertically explosive players in this class. So to get him in the 40s, I do think is pretty good value. 42, we got the New York Knicks here now. Found them a point guard that would make some sense for them in round 1. And now here at 42, I think what I'm going to go with here is actually Oscar Tshiebwe from Kentucky. So he's one of those interesting players where you look at stats and what numbers he puts up. on a night-to-night basis, you're going to say, wow, how is this guy not a first-round pick averaging like 15 and 15 on good efficiency? Part of that is because he's a 6'9" center who just outworks guys in college. He's a little bit stronger than guys in college. He's not going to have quite that production in the NBA, but what you look at here with New York, Mitchell Robinson's headed toward restricted free agency. So we'll see, are they able to keep him? Or is he going to be able to walk? That's going to be a big question. Nerlens Noel's on a deal right now. They also have Jericho Sims, who they drafted in the second round last year. I'm not sure if they're sold on Noel and Sims as a potential front court duo. So I think they at least bring Sheboy into the fold, gives you another guy to add to the rotation in case you are worried about losing Mitchell Robinson in free agency. 43, the Los Angeles Clippers here now at this spot in the draft. And I think the big thing here for them is looking for another point guard who could help this team out a little bit. I do see Mike Miles here from TCU. He's a sophomore, competing in the U19 World Cup last year. Just didn't have the season for TCU that he would have liked to have. Caleb Love is someone who's probably higher on other people's boards than he is on mine. Andre Curbelo, he's not going to come out. He entered the transfer portal, so I think that he's going to be staying at the collegiate level. Taron Armstrong as well here from California Baptist. I don't think that he's going to be on the radar here yet at this point. Eric Gaines, one of the players who floats. They do have a history of taking some of Austin's favorite collegiate players. So maybe Eric Gaines would be on their radar then because of that. But here at this spot, you know, I think Dalen Terry's actually a guy that makes sense and kind of fits their draft history and players that they've been interested in. They have a lot of interest in bigger guards, specifically Jerry West. When you look at and Lawrence Frank as well, when they make decisions on who to draft, you think about guys like Amir Coffey, who they brought in. You also look at Terrence Mann, who was a point guard in college. They like bigger guards who are a little raw and moldable, and Dalen Terry is that from Arizona. He is very, very raw. But I think what he could be in the NBA is a versatile, multi-positional defender who is comfortable bringing the ball up the floor. Now, probably not going to get you into a lot of stuff, but he can take a little pressure off the main point guard, main ball handler by being, you know, a tertiary or secondary ball handler at times. Probably not going to move the needle a ton early in his career, but this does fit their draft history. You know, they've also looked at a ton of centers, but they don't have the best track record drafting centers when you consider, you know, Fiondu Kabanyele. You also look at Daniel Oturu, guys who just haven't stuck there in LA. Maybe they're tired of taking the bigs and they want to go with another guard that they've had success with Amir Coffey and also with someone like Terrence Mann. They've found a lot of success with those picks in the second round. 44, the Atlanta Hawks here now at this spot. And for Atlanta, there's a few things I think that they'll consider here. I think they want to get better defensively, but I also think they're going to try to add to their point guard room. And one that makes sense here is Andrew Nemhart. He was somewhat inconsistent this past year for Gonzaga. And this comes down to their evaluation on Sharif Cooper. If they feel like Sharif Cooper's ready, maybe Andrew Nemhart's not the pick. They have a better indication of where Sharif's at than I do. They get to see him more frequently. They get to see him in practice. They have a closer eye on him in the G League than I do. Maybe they say, no, we don't need to take a point guard. But if they do want to take one to kind of round out their rotation a little bit, someone who's comfortable with the ball in his hands, I think Nemhart makes a lot of sense at this spot, just given the fact that they could use one, in my estimation. I think Sharif Cooper probably is better than Nemhart long-term, but it gives you another guy to at least take some load off of Trae Young, especially throughout a long 82-game regular season. 45, Charlotte here again on the board. Of course, Christian Braun we went with earlier. And again, for this team, I think that I'm trying to add a little bit more size and physicality to this team here. And I'm going to go with David Roddy, one of the grittiest players in this class. Again, I've talked about him earlier in this video, but from Colorado State, I mean, this guy's competitive. And if you're Charlotte, you're trying to make the jump from, you know, a 9 seed to maybe the 7 or 6 seed. You need a competitive guy next to LaMelo Ball, someone who's going to get scrappy, get on the floor, but also is going to make the right play consistently, plays within himself, is going to play in a role. And I think that, you know, he checks off all those boxes. So if you're looking for a second round player who could make some sense, you know, again, these guys aren't going to absolutely change your franchise, but if they help you win 1 or 2 games or establish a good culture or, you know, bring the most effort, even during practice, I do think there is a lot to be said about that. So David Roddy, I think, is an intriguing pickup, even though he's an undersized 4 in today's NBA. 46, we got the Pistons here. Of course, made a big splash in round 1. Pistons fans, leave a like on this video if you are enjoying. And then here at 46, there's a few things you could consider. And I think Marvin Bagley's probably found himself a home there in Detroit. So I don't think we necessarily need to look at a big yet at this point. What I would like to see is them address another wing type player here, and there's a few options. For me, I'm going to go with Harrison Ingram, who has some decent upside. He's a 6'7" forward from Stanford. That hasn't shot the ball extremely well this past year, but what he has done is show some defensive upside at 6'7" with pretty good length. I think that he could make a little bit of noise there in Detroit. I know last year they took Isaiah Livers. He's found himself a little bit of a role as well from Michigan there for the Pistons. But now, with Saddiq Bey there, I still think that they could throw another wing into the mix, especially with some trade rumors around Jeremy Grant. We'll see exactly what happens with Detroit. They have a lot of flexibility for sure. But I think ultimately Harrison Ingram does make some sense given the long-term outlook. Pick 47, now we have the New Orleans Pelicans. They also have pick 52 in this second round. And here, you notice Peyton Watson's still on the board. I do not think he's going to get drafted this year. I'd be actually shocked if he comes out just because he played so poorly this past year for the UCLA Bruins. But one player who I do think makes a lot of sense for them here, and he's at the small forward position specifically, that is Johnny Juzang, who I think is way too good to be a pick after pick 45. But, this is a mock of what I think could happen, not necessarily what I would do. And if the Pelicans could get him here, that would be absolutely huge. You need another wing behind Brandon Ingram, specifically since they traded Josh Hart away. It does open up a little bit of wing minutes here throughout an 82-game regular season. And Johnny Juzang is one of those guys who's ready to come in and help this team win, which is the goal. David Griffin needs to win games to keep his job there in New Orleans. I feel like he's been on the hot seat. The CJ McCollum trade has probably cooled it off a little bit because of how well they've played since that deal. But ultimately, if they miss the playoffs this year, the year I'm talking, and then they also miss the playoffs next year, he's probably out of a job. So they're going to bring in a player who's ready to help them win. That's Johnny Juzang, and I think it's a pretty good selection for this roster. 48, we got the Minnesota Timberwolves again here. And for me, if I'm Minnesota, I'm looking for a little bit more size to try and help out behind Naz Reid and Karl Anthony Towns. Those two guys get hurt fairly consistently, and I think the one thing that makes a lot of sense here actually for Minnesota is to get a player who plays similarly to Karl Anthony Towns, at least in one aspect, and that's Trevion Williams from Purdue. Anyone who's watched Purdue this season has seen any or all of Trevion Williams' crazy, phenomenal passes out of the post. One of the best post passers in this year's class, if not the best. He is very skilled. You see him throw some crazy wraparound passes. He's able to throw from right block to left block to right corner. He does it all, right hand over the head. And the one thing that he also has in his game right now, which is really consistent, is a right hand baby hook that is very tough to cover with the strength and physicality he plays with. Trevion Williams, I think he's going to struggle defensively, but with Chris Finch's system, this is probably one of the better landing spots because he is one of those players that is actually comfortable coming out into space. He's not comfortable coming out into space, but Chris Finch, rather, his defense kind of hides that a little bit with the idea of blitzing and then forcing rotations in order to not isolate your big one-on-one out on the perimeter. So for me, Trevion Williams, a pretty good answer here for the Timberwolves. 49, Golden State Warriors here. This pick comes from Toronto. Again, probably in a series of moves. And with what we're looking at here for Golden State, we already addressed a wing earlier on. I think one thing that we need is another playmaker in the mix here for the Golden State Warriors, and one that I think actually does make a ton of sense. Let's see if I can actually find him here. He might not even be on the site actually, which is a little problematic if that's the case. I'm looking for Carlos Allison, who's a Spanish-born player. It does not look like he's on here, unfortunately. So what I'm going to do here, this is Carlos Allison, the selection I'm making here. I'm just going to put Darren Green Jr. As the selection, but it is actually Carlos Allison. That's who I would mock them taking, specifically because here for Golden State, they just need another guy who they can put the ball in his hands and have him make plays. Carlos Allison reminds me a little bit of Ricky Rubio, not quite as consistent as a playmaker, I don't think. Leaves his feet a little bit too frequently to be where Rubio was considered when Rubio came out in his own draft class. But Carlos Allison, I do actually really like this kid. He would add a little bit of flair to that offense, and I think he's really willing to play in the system as well. The one issue for me is he's a non-shooter, but when you have the gravitational pull of Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, and you also have Jordan Poole now off the bench, who's really come around as a shooter and scorer in this league, that, a player like Carlos Allison having a non-shooter on the floor doesn't necessarily kill your offense, especially in Steve Kerr's system. Pick 50, the Sacramento Kings here now at this spot. Again, we've been able to find two good wings for them. So what I'm looking for here now is probably another, guard type where they can come in, give you a little bit more flexibility with your lineups, especially, again, I keep saying it, through an 82 game season. One of the most important parts of the NBA is finding depth and guys who can, really take some load off of your team moving forward. So let's go ahead and look through here at some of the guards that are available. Sasha Stevonovic is an interesting name to watch. I actually am going to mock him here. I know his rank says 127. I don't care. He's one of the better shooters in this year's class. And for me, with Sacramento, they need shooting. I said it in the first round mock portion, and I'll say it again now. In a trade for Domantas Sabonis, who's the hub of an offense type passer in the mid post, you traded away your two best shooters in one deal, in Buddy Hield and also Tyrese Halliburton. You need to replenish shooting, and I feel like we've been able to do this in this mock draft. Sure, maybe Sasha Stevonovic, you could have signed as a UDFA, but you also risk another team trying to sign him as a UDFA. Maybe give him a little bit more upfront money in a signing bonus. They give him an extra $50,000, and you're out of a shooter that could actually probably help your team. He was huge for Purdue this year, hit a ton of big shots, and I think actually could make some sense for Sacramento, even though his rank here on this website was a little lower than I think where it's deserved to be. 51, we've got the Minnesota Timberwolves again. And here at this spot, it's probably just trying to find a guy who can maybe have a nice long-term career in the NBA. And for me, that's going to be Keon Ellis here out of Alabama. I'm really impressed by him. So they actually go with two Alabama players. Keon Ellis was probably the best player this past year for the Crimson Tide. Watching their games, he was the most consistent player. Not the best half-court scorer, but he was a pretty good athlete, and I think gives you a little bit more burst in that backcourt. Again, probably not going to play a huge role, but if you're looking for someone who could at least take some spot minutes, assume Jalen Noel gets injured and misses some time, Keon Ellis could probably fill those minutes rather quickly. He's also a senior, so he's just a little bit further along in his development, probably a little bit more NBA ready than other guys in the second round here. Pick 52, New Orleans on the board again. We've gone with Ty Washington and Johnny Juzang. And here now for me with New Orleans, I'm going to look for a big one that could give me a little bit of assistance for my offense. And I'm actually going to opt for Jalen Williams here from Arkansas. He had a really great NCAA tournament run. Probably wouldn't have been considered for a draft pick in this year's class without that run. But Arkansas got fairly deep, specifically because of the play of JD Note and himself. And Jalen Williams is a little intriguing here for the NBA because of his ability to shoot the ball as a big. Also has pretty good versatility with his fluidity on the perimeter, both on offense and defense, moves his feet pretty well, and actually was the best charge taker in the NBA. So again, if you're going to look for New Orleans here, you need to get better defensively, and Jalen Williams, a very smart defensive player, just seems to always be in the right spot, and can also shoot the three ball well, which is going to open up the paint a little bit more for Zion Williamson. 53, Washington Wizards here now on the board. Very interesting team here to talk about just because of currently where they're at. Bradley Beal, I think, is the interesting name to watch because very possible he decides that he does not want to be in Washington anymore. I think that is a realistic possibility. And if you do that, you have to be ready for life after that. But here, ultimately, I don't know if there's anything on the board that really would change your life if you're that team, if you're Washington. So what I'm actually going to go with here is Jamarian Sharp. And the idea here, he's one of the best shot blockers in all of college basketball. That's because he stands at 7'5" for Western Kentucky. He actually comes off the bench for Western Kentucky. So it's an interesting pick. Probably one, again, where maybe he's just not ready to play. But the idea here, maybe if you're Washington, is, hey, if we're going to be good at something, maybe we can at least get some real serious length on the floor. We play Kristaps at the 4, play Jamarian Sharp at the 5, see if we can really disrupt some stuff, get some pretty good rim protection, get some easy buckets out in transition after block shots, and play that way. Maybe they find their little niche. You look at what Cleveland's done. They've played a lot of big lineups, and this is way bigger in terms of actual listed height and listed wingspan. Jamarian Sharp is absolutely massive. Now, he doesn't move the best, but he's not terribly immobile. So for me, Jamarian Sharp, I think there's some upside here for Washington. He probably isn't ready to play right away. He's probably a couple years away from making an impact. But again, if you're Washington, with where they're currently at, they have a ton of forwards. We've already addressed the guard in this draft. You probably don't need a guy who's going to come in and make an immediate impact anyway. Probably best to try and take someone and try and find a niche for your actual roster moving down the line. 54, we've got the Boston Celtics here now at this spot. And in this draft, for me, the concern here is I think that they have to find a backup center or a point guard. Obviously, they trade away their first round pick. in the deal for Derek White. So they don't have a first-round pick. Scottie Pippen Jr., best player for Vanderbilt, clearly the only good player on that team. I think he's probably going to stay another year at Vanderbilt and then come out as a senior. So I'm not going to mock him here, actually. One thing that you could consider is maybe Max Abmas, who is a phenomenal shooter, a little undersized though, so I'm not exactly sure with their defense if they would love to bring him in. But they've been able to do it in the past, with Brad Stevens as the new GM there, the president of basketball operations. He's making all the big time decisions. He's been able to orchestrate great defense with Isaiah Thomas as his point guard. So maybe he would consider a guy like Max Abmas here. But ultimately, I think they're going to go with a guy like Ibu Dianko-Baji, who's an overseas player, very, very big and lengthy as well, can protect the rim. He's probably one of the better defensive players in this year's class. He's very raw offensively, but when you have Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, you can get away with that a little bit. Again, I don't think he's really ready to play right now, but when you look at what Boston has, they've got some pretty good players all across the board here. They've really found their identity as of late, so I don't have concerns for them right now. The one thing I have concerns about is Robert Williams and his longevity. He is just misses game after game after game. And unfortunately, that's continued here with this torn meniscus. We'll see exactly how they deal with that on how much time he misses. But down the road here, Baji could potentially take a little bit of pressure off of him for, again, a strenuous, long 82-game regular season. 55, we got the Milwaukee Bucks here now. And for me, I think this one becomes pretty obvious with what I'm going to go here. And that's actually going to be Kofi Cockburn from Illinois, a player who some people thought was going to be a first-round pick. I thought that was a little ridiculous. But with Cockburn here, a player for Illinois who is very big. Now, he's a terrible passer, one of the worst passers I've ever evaluated. But the nice thing for Milwaukee is if you bring him in, the idea is he's going to protect the rim. You probably stagger his minutes with Giannis. You try and give him the ball down low. He's a massive human being. I know he's only listed at 7 feet, but he is huge and wide. That's the biggest thing. He's probably like 280 pounds of just pure muscle. He's terribly difficult to cover and deal with down low. You probably are going to have to send some doubles at him. He's that big and strong. So for me, even though he's a terrible passer, he does protect the rim fairly well. And I think that's one element they've been missing with Brook Lopez while he had been out with injury. Obviously, they got Lopez back now healthy. But again, you're looking long-term here. Cockburn gives you a little bit of flexibility for a long, again, strenuous 82-game regular season. I feel like I keep saying that, but I have to because that's part of the point here with some of these second-round picks. Some of these guys aren't going to necessarily move the needle other than filling in some depth spots for rosters. 56 here, Miami now on the board. And again, I'm looking at the center spot here specifically because there's a few options out here that could make some sense. Zach Edey was huge for Purdue. I don't necessarily know if he's going to come out this year. I think there's quite a few holes in his game that I'm not sure he's going to be ready to come out. I don't know if he has enough momentum to. And I think that they have pretty good confidence in Omer Yurtseven as well, that maybe he could be their guy. So the player I'm actually going to go with here is Trace Jackson Davis, who I actually had fall probably a little bit too far even. But just given the fact how athletic he is, I could see him playing some small ball center, listed about 6'10". He's very athletic though, can protect the rim, can be a nice rim runner, screen setter, and slip guy. So for me in the offense, I think he actually gives them a little bit more athleticism and flexibility when Bam Adebayo is off the floor, and then gives them a rim protector as well on the defensive side of the ball. 57, Cleveland, again, now on the clock. We went with Blake Wesley earlier in this second round. And for me here, I don't have concerns about their big men position. I think it's all about wings here now at this spot. And for me, there's a couple guys out here. Baylor Shireman from South Dakota State. He's an intriguing wing prospect. You could also look at Marcus Bagley from Arizona State, who I thought could be a second-round pick last year. Decided not to come out. Didn't have the season he was looking for. I think he's probably going to stay, but I think maybe he would be an option if he does decide to actually come out and see what his value is. I'm actually going to go with Baylor Shireman here from South Dakota State. Not a lot of people know him. Very low-profile guy, but I think that his, skill set leans itself to being an NBA player. Now, he does not look the part. He does not look like an NBA player when you just first glance at him. I'll say that, but specifically with what, he could help there in Cleveland, it's all about wing depth again. Right now they have Isaac Okoro, Karis LeVert, and that's about it. So you have to find someone who can come in and give you a little bit of minutes there, and Baylor Shireman, I think, is ready to do that. 58, we got the Golden State Warriors here now. And for me with Golden State, after going with Carlos Allison in the second round already, I feel like we've done a pretty good job addressing some of their needs. Now here, I think you just go with a player who probably could fit what you're trying to do and is a smarter player ready for a bigger stage, and that's probably Drew Timme. Again, I don't love Drew Timme as a player, but what I do think he will do is play within the system, and I think he understands the game well. You see what he was able to do at Gonzaga. Pretty much anything Mark Few asked him to do, he would go out and do it well. Whether that's a high-low game with Chet Holmgren, whether it's as a screener out on the perimeter trying to set someone up like Andrew Nemhart. I mean, he just did a lot of stuff right. So if you're looking for Golden State, a team that runs a lot of motion offense, you have to be a very smart basketball player to play there, which is one of the things that we've really seen from some of their rookies. Moses Moody has come across really smart. You also look at Jonathan Kaminga. A lot of people were questioning his basketball IQ. I didn't understand why, because even though there's times where it doesn't look like he knows what he's doing, he fills in the gaps and he gets it done. His experience as a basketball player is clear. I think the G League Ignite was huge for him, and now Drew Timme comes into the fold as well. Probably doesn't move the needle a ton, but again, long season gives you another flexibility and depth option. 59, we got the Portland Trailblazers here now, and with this pick, you're looking at Portland trying to probably find another wing or big here, because I think Brandon Williams is a really nice find for them. And I also like what they have in Anthony Simons, and also, of course, Dame Lillard is still there. So I think the backcourt is fairly well situated. So you're looking for some more wings or guys that can help you out in terms of physicality. And I'm going to go with Rocco Perkachin, specifically because he's a very nice shooter. Last year, I thought he could come out. Last year, I thought he would have been probably a top 50 pick. Decided to actually go back to Croatia and did not come out in this past draft. So he's still available here. Goes 59th now to Portland. Gives you a smooth shooting four-man who can probably put the ball on the deck a little bit. And gives you another versatility option. Again, I don't know if Portland has remade its team enough to the point where they're going to be great, but I think they're at least better with this selection. Pick 60, Indiana now on the board to end the mock draft in whole. Of course, this second round, we've actually had a really good draft here for Indiana. Looking at Ben Mathurin, Kendall Brown, Malaki Branham. That's a good collection of wing type players with physicality, speed, size, athleticism. I mean, I love it. I love what they've been able to do now in this mock. And for me here, I'm going to look for a center. I mean, this is probably where Zach Edey would get a little bit of consideration. You could also look at Orlando Robinson from Fresno State, who's starting to climb up some boards. If you look at the power forward spot, the one thing I want to go with here is a little bit more athleticism on someone who could make, move the needle. Maybe I'll go Isaiah Mobley here. Actually, I think I had him go probably a little bit too low as well from USC. I really do like Isaiah Mobley as a player. Again, here you can take a look at exactly everyone that went here in the second round. I do think this was a pretty good cast of players here, so we'll scroll through this quickly. But Isaiah Mobley is a smooth shooting big man. Probably would actually really fit Rick Carlisle's system well as a pick and pop big. And I think, you could see the flurry of double screens up top for Tyrese Halliburton, with Miles Turner probably crashing the rim, and you see Isaiah Mobley probably spacing out to the three-point line, or vice versa. You have some flexibility there. Remember, this Darren Green selection is actually Carlos Allison from Real Madrid. And I think this is a pretty good mock draft. It's a little difficult. Second round, gets a little bit more up in the air. It's less consistency. It's kind of more about who teams like and what they need, rather than what the consensus board is. So, there's maybe a guy that you say, oh, he went about 15 spots too low. I mean, it happens every year. Look at what happened to BJ Boston this past draft, where the Clippers traded cash to go get him, and he's had some really nice games this season. So, it happens. But overall here, I think this is a potential way that the mock could fall through. So make sure to go check out the first round mock if you haven't already. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.